Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
And we're back for an insightful episode of Roundtable Mindset today. New words. Love it. Although I think every episode we do is insightful. So I'm just that could become the new word.
I just think we say what's ever on our mind. And right now, what's on our mind is insightful.
There you go.
That's what we're going to go with.
There you go.
And it is going to be, I think, an insightful conversation because this is going to be touching on some things that we've talked about in the past while giving a little bit of a new content to it. So I think it will be insightful. I think that's a good word.
Yeah, it is kind of like adding to the bouquet of things that we've chatted about before. So yes, we're excited to bring that to you. But before we get started, Malin, how are things in Malin land?
Well, everything is going just swimmingly. So I know I mentioned a while back that I always wait for the other shoe to drop, and I'm still waiting for that. I'm still waiting for that moment where it's like, okay, now this feels normal. But for the most part, and I think it's the time of year because we're finally out of January and February. We're now in the middle of March. St. Patrick's Day is coming up in just a couple days. The weather is getting nicer. Spring is technically going to happen next week. So things are, for me, things are really looking up and going really well. In addition to all of that, like I was mentioning, we are getting ready for my daughter's graduation party that we're putting together. So yeah, things are going really, really good for us. They're going fast, but going really good. How about you? What's going on in your world, in your neck of the land?
Well, I hate to be like doom and gloom, but if today is March 14th, that makes tomorrow the Ides of March. And that is a day of doom and gloom. So hopefully the other shoe doesn't drop on you tomorrow. It's like, an old-fashioned Friday the 13th or something. So that's a term that I haven't heard for a very long time. Refresh my memory. What exactly is the Ides of March again? Beware the Ides of March. I remember it from Shakespeare in high school. And I didn't remember what it was, so I also had to look it up. It comes up on my Facebook memories every year, but I had forgotten. It's been a while since I was in that class. So it's
been a while since I cracked Shakespeare. I got to be honest.
Well, unless it's in movie form, I can do that. But no, it's like an ancient day of doom and from ancient Rome, which makes me think it was from Julius Caesar, if I remember right. But like I said, it's been a while, so. That was my favorite place, so it wouldn't surprise me if that would stick for me. You know what I'm saying?
So now, beware the Ides of March kind of makes sense. It's like the anti St. Patrick's Day. Like St. Patrick's Day is all lucky, and Ides of March is doom and gloom and kind of Friday the 13th-ish. Okay, I get it now. So,
well, quite frankly, though, is St. Patrick's Day as lucky as 3/14?
Well, it depends on what 3/14 to me is Pie Day. So
Pie Day.
You can have pizza pie, you can have fruit pie, apple pie, cherry pie, kind of whatever pie you want.
Oh, Malin, you just expanded my perspective because I never would have thought pizza pie. Like I stretched Pie Day out of the box for like cheesecake. That was my rebel. My rebel move.
I'm going to have cheesecake. It's round. It could be a pie. It can't. It's cheesecake.
You slice it like a pie, so it's fine.
Yeah. No, that's this has become one of our family tradition is that we usually get pizza pie, or we definitely get ourselves a pie that we bake off. My brother actually is the one who first wished me happy Pie Day, and I never thought about it 3.14. I'm not going to continue, but I was like, oh my gosh, it is. And up until he wished me happy Pi Day, and this has been, it's been a few years back, I never really knew it was that big of a deal, but everybody does something. People at work tell me, last year they were like, what are you doing for Pi Day? And it's become one of those, I don't want to say holiday because it's not a holiday, but you get what I mean. It's like one of those days that everybody celebrates, and it's so easy to remember because of the date. And a lot of people enjoy pie in whatever form it's going to be, even in cheesecake, I guess.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's my favorite kind of pie. I think we should definitely, though, maybe we should write to our congressman and see if we can't get it to be a national holiday. Then I would just be over the moon excited about that.
Yeah.
A day off.
I don't know. For Pi Day, there's other days I'd rather have off than Pi Days, to be honest. But I love the enthusiasm. I love it.
Let's do it.
Since we're kind of talking about Ides of March and St. Patrick Day, this folds really nicely into the food for thought that I want to talk about.
It does. What a lucky coincidence. Literally. We didn't even plan this one.
Shh, don't show our hands. Of course we did. We're brilliant. This is all part of the plan, people. No. So I wanted to talk about, again, I was mostly thinking about St. Patrick's Day. The question that has been rolling around in my brain, and we did put this out there on our Facebook page for those of you that are part of that and following along. This is, are you generally a lucky or unlucky person, and why? So the food for thought around this one is, really, how much does luck play into our successes or failures? Is luck just a superstition, or do you put some merit into it? Is there something about being lucky or unlucky in life? What do you think?
I don't consider myself a lucky or unlucky person. And I feel like we've kind of touched on something similar before, but I really do. I feel like I am the recipient of the things that have started way before me, or things that I started, right? Like every choice we make, every move we make it sets a ripple. And sometimes those ripples are great and sometimes they're not so great. But I don't know. I just don't put a whole lot of stock in luck. When I think about luck, I think about things more like gratitude. Like I feel really lucky to have my kids in my life, or I feel really lucky to be in the job that I'm in. Like it's more like a gratitude feeling for me when I use those words. But I guess I don't put a ton of stock in. Like I feel like I make my own luck, or I make my own unluck. It really is my choices that come to there.
So then for your misfortune, all of your things that have happened positively or negatively, so even the misfortune that's come upon you, you're willing to say that those were as a result of the actions that you've set into motion in your life?
No, I don't think all of them are. I mean, I definitely think that there are plenty of them, right? I mean, there's plenty of things that happen to us that are based on choices or decisions that we made way back. And sometimes choices and the decisions maybe that we didn't even make. But I definitely think that if we're talking about spaces where I do have a choice or a say, then those things that one might deem lucky or unlucky are usually, those can be things that I made a say in. I think life happens. I mean, there are things that are way outside of our control. We've talked about that before too, those things are outside of our control that affect us, but we don't have any say in them. I don't think that my choices lead to that, right? Like if I lose a ton of money in the stock market, it's not necessarily because of choice I made, but I'm affected by it. So I try to look at those things in that way too, to say, hey, okay, is this something that I had control over? Is this something that I had a say in, and learn from that and move forward? But I don't think that all things are based on my choices or lack, like good or bad choices, if that makes sense.
It does. I think you fall in line with your earlier statement. I wasn't quite sure, but I think with how you just ended that, I think we might be closer than I was originally thinking. So when I hear the word lucky or unlucky, I acknowledge that there's luck in life. There's lucky things that happen to us. This is my belief. There's lucky things that have happened to me. There are unlucky things that have happened to me. I think how we respond to those, or how much importance we place on them is where the distinction is. Can I say that there are some, at my level, again, without trying to get into my religious views, at my level, are there some things that are lucky or unlucky that happen to me? Yes. How I choose to focus on them or how I choose to capitalize on them, those are 100% my decisions. So in my career, there have been some very lucky moves that have, opportunities that have come my way. And it was lucky that they were presented to me, but it was my ability and my work ethic that took those opportunities, and I did with what I did with them with what I needed to. So can I say it was a lucky break? Maybe there's something to being the right place at the right time. Oh, that was very lucky. Sometimes you hear people they were just in the right place at the right time walking the mall and someone took a picture of them and now they are a supermodel and their life was not even supposed to be going that way according to them until that off chance happened. Same thing can go with people that have misfortune. I know several people that have one thing after another that seems to kind of befall upon them, and they would say that is very unlucky. I have a neighbor that I admire them greatly. And I admire them because one could say they are the unluckiest family I have ever met in my entire life. One thing after another, after another. But to meet them, you would never know it. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Does luck happen? I would say yes. Does chance happen? Yeah. Can somebody have more positive chance than negative, or more negative than positive? Yes, I think so. But I think it all boils down to, what do we do with those when those happens, when those situations come up? Can you just sit back and expect luck to get you that next promotion? No. But maybe it's a lucky break that you get some of those opportunities that then you capitalize on that leads to the next promotion. So that's the best way that I would want to kind of categorize all of the luck and being lucky or unlucky is, I think it can present opportunities to you, but you have to decide what you're going to do with those opportunities.
Well, I think a lot of it too is where we look at it from. So here's where I'm going with that. Like, for instance, I feel like people who I know who are constantly unlucky and who focus on that, it's like more bad luck finds them. And I'm using air quotes there because I think we get to a space where we start looking for those things, and then we see more of those things, right? Like you buy the new Mustang and that's all you see around town. Whereas for me personally, I try not to put too much stock in that, because I feel like that can almost lead to me feeling a little bit like a victim. Like I'm at the mercy of luck or bad luck. And I don't have any say in that. And so I think there's a balance there between recognizing opportunities, recognizing, I don't know, I guess you called them lucky breaks, and I can go with that. Or for me, I consider those like blessings, right? And focusing on doing the legwork and doing the hustle to make sure that we're able to get those things too. You know what I'm saying? I would hate to ever get to a space where I feel like I'm a victim, or the only way something good my way can come is if I'm lucky, if it just dumb luck strikes me.
Right. Well, I want to leave on this because we put this on our Facebook page and we had quite a few people weigh in. The one that stands out to me is we have somebody who's been listening to us, I think, from the very beginning. So Amanda, if you're listening, just give you a little bit of a nod because we're going to be using your answer you gave on Facebook. And, Amanda says, and I'm going to summarize to get to the root of this, but she summarizes and says she generally feels like she's a lucky person, and she's lucky because of the things she has in her life, so a loving family, great friends, good health. So she ultimately feels, like she's a lucky person, although she gives most of that to the goodness of God. But she says she's generally a lucky person. She did share with us in there a perfect example of, in my opinion, what luck is, which is luck is a perspective. And I'm going to read this to you.
Ooh, please do.
It's from Lolly Doskal, which I've never heard of. I don't know if you have or not, but it's lollydoskal.com is where this comes from. And it's titled Good Luck or Bad Luck, Who Knows? And I'm just going to read this really quick. I'm not going to read the whole article or the whole document because it's rather lengthy, but maybe if you get a chance, you can go look at it. So there's a story of a farmer who used an old horse to till his fields. One day, the horse escaped into the hills. When the farmer's neighbors sympathized with the old man over his bad luck, the farmer replied, "Bad luck or good luck, who knows?" A week later, the horse returned with a herd of horses from the hills. This time, the neighbors congratulated the farmer on his good luck. His reply was, "Good luck or bad luck, who knows?" Then when the farmer's son was attempting to tame one of the wild horses, he fell off his back and broke his leg. Everyone thought this was very bad luck. The farmer's reaction, bad luck or good luck, who knows? Some weeks later, the army marched into the village and conscripted every able-bodied youth they found there. When they saw the farmer's son with his broken leg, they let him off. Was that good luck or bad luck? Who knows? And I just thought that was kind of funny. It's a good way to kind of look at that is who knows if it's really good luck or bad luck. Maybe it's about what's happening in the moment when that does happen, because look what one thing led to the other in that example with the farmer. And who really does know if it's good luck or bad luck?
Well, and if you think back to our episode, our Talk About It Tuesday about the lottery winner, when I was like looking up, I was trying to find how often that happened. And you know what I found? It was article after article after article about how lottery winners report that it destroyed their lives, right? So you have this huge lucky thing, this thing that just strikes like lightning. And is it really good luck if it destroys your relationships and, you know, all of those things? Is it really good luck? And so I love that idea of that it is really about perspective. I think it's a matter of us looking at these things and deciding, wow, I'm really grateful that that happened to me, or that's something I can learn from and do different in the future, you know?
I just think it's funny that when we talk about the lottery, and I get where this analogy comes from, because winning the lottery, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than you do winning the lottery. But what normally happens to somebody who gets struck by lightning? They usually die or they get severely injured.
They die?
So it's like, really, is winning the lottery just as lucky as someone who gets struck by lightning? I get the chance of it, but is it as lucky?
Oh, Malin, way to go dark.
That's my specialty. But I thought that's kind of funny when you start thinking about it in that way. Is it as lucky to get struck by lightning or win the lottery?
Yeah.
Maybe it's the same.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks for bringing that, Amanda. I appreciate that perspective. That's summed up very nicely what I was thinking too. So,
all right. So let's move on to the main course. I think you said this one time and it stuck in my brain, the main event, which is...
I almost said it again. I'm not going to lie.
I know. It's like, I don't know why, when you said it that one time, it just got lodged there. And I'm like, but it's here. So we just used it. So we are going to talk and touch on the difference between being empathetic and empathy. And so this one is going to be very interesting for me.
Wait a second. We're going to talk about the difference between empathetic and empathy, or
being empathetic
or an empath.
Oh, that's right. See, I'm already messing that up. Being an empath or being empathetic. Did I say the same thing over twice? Pretty
much, but it's okay.
Pretty much.
It's okay.
Being an empath and then being empathetic.
Yes. I think it took a long time for me to even recognize that was two different things, right?
I'm going to agree with you at the very beginning. When we first started talking about this, I did think an empath was somebody who was very empathetic. I did not see the distinction between the difference. And I really was thinking one and the same. And as we've been talking the last couple of weeks, and empathy keeps raising its head, I wanted to know, are they different or are they really the same? So I want to start off, there was an article that I found that said the key difference between being an empath versus empathy is the reliance on external cues. It says the feeling of empathy requires an external trigger, like getting a phone call or seeing the look on someone's face. Being an empath does not. And I think that's where I would like to have our conversation start, Jamie, is I'd like to have our conversation around this start with that, because that's, I don't know about you, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. That's a very dangerous statement for me, for people that are claiming to be an empath, who say they are empathic. And again, this is me just learning this space, so I'm trying to tiptoe around as much as I can. But in that article, one is an external trigger, the other one isn't. Where does that trigger come from? So that's where I'm having a lot of my angst around this.
Well, and so for me, this isn't something that I have just started giving thought to. This is something that I have thought about before. I have known a lot of people in my life who have said, I'm such an empath. And even in those people that I know, what that looks like varies massively from person to person, right? And so I don't know, leave it to me to go back to my favorite TV shows. But did you watch Charmed when it was popular?
I've watched a couple episodes, but that's about it.
Okay. Well, it was one of my favorite shows way back in the day, because that's an old show. But one of the main characters, Phoebe, is an empath. And when she first got her empathic power, if you don't know about the show Charmed, it's, 3 sister witches who are charmed because there's 3 of them, right? And so Phoebe has the power of premonition in the very, very beginning. And as the show goes on in the later seasons of the show, that kind of morphs into empath, like an empath. And when that first started happening, it was like she would walk into a room, and in one episode, they walked into like a mental hospital. And so they had all of these people that had severe mental health challenges, and she was feeling all of the feelings from all of them, and it made her collapse, and she couldn't be in the room with them. Like, she ended up having to go into the basement so she couldn't feel her sister's emotions and all of this stuff. It was like a physical reaction to other people's feelings. Now, this is a fictional television show, right? So there's that. I talked to a very close friend of a very close, I guess, family member of mine, and asked some questions about empaths and empathy. And he told me that he identifies as an empath. And I kind of knew that because we had talked about this before. And he told me that, he said, it's not like a magical power. He said, it's not something that, I have some mystical ability outside of just being observant. So I think that there's a range of ways that people express this. I don't know that I agree that there's some supernatural power, that it's like, of course, I don't know if I believe in psychics either. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where I stand with that. But I definitely think that there are people who are more sensitive to the emotions of people around them, and who are more vigilant to what's happening in that. And I did some research about what that came from, but I bet we'll get to that down the road. So,
yeah. So I want to be clear. Like, I don't know much about this topic, and I'm going to say that I am learning what I can. And what I've done in researching this, I have some concerns, mostly because everything I've been reading so far makes being an empath very much like a psychic, or very, very, it seems like a mystic art of some kind, right? Like, and what I really am not comfortable with is the whole notion of, I show empathy. That means I use whatever I'm seeing or my own personal experience to try to understand how a person's feeling in the same or in a similar event. That to me makes sense. That seems normal, right? Like, I'm doing what I can to relate to the person and show that person love and support, and saying, hey, I can understand. I go back to the analogy of, maybe I've never lost a parent and one of my friends loses their parent, but maybe I lost a grandparent or an uncle, or, something that's not as close to you as your parent. But you draw on that to come to them and say, hey, I'm very sorry. And you try to put yourself in their spot, and you really try to empathize with them. That seems normal to me. What doesn't seem normal or seems like it's more of a supernatural ability is when you have this definition of an empath, which is, I don't need any of that. If somebody walks into the room, I can just sense their emotions. And not only that, I take on their emotions as well. And I think that's dangerous because now you are reading into something that may not even be there. And you could be coming to conclusions that you shouldn't be coming to. And I'm trying to be very careful because, again, I don't proclaim myself to be an empath or know everything there is about this. I'm just trying to dig in a little bit. But that's where I'm stuck. Like, showing empathy to someone and being empathetic, I understand. Having someone walk into the room, it sounds like it's a great, Charmed episode or Charmed character. But in real life, do they really exist? Can somebody really know what another person's feeling just because they are sensitive?
Yeah, I mean, when I have used the word, or when I have talked about someone, as in, like, okay, that sounded really bad. When I've talked about like someone's ability in empathy, right? I might have described someone as an empath because they do have some extra ability to, I guess, listen, to be able to relate, to show comfort and care and concern in spaces where it might be outside of their wheelhouse. I have known people like that, that really are kind of extraordinary in that way, but not like supernatural extraordinary. You know what I mean? It's just like people who are extra caring, people who are extra compassionate or kind. You know what I mean?
I do. And here's where I'm throwing another log on the fire. And I didn't know this existed. And I didn't know I had a disorder, Jamie, when it came to empathy.
Oh, what? Did Dr. Google diagnose you?
Not Dr. Well, again, you go into these articles and you look around, but some of it makes sense. And so I'm not going to say that everybody, if you think you're an empath, you have a disorder. But what I do say is, I think this is interesting. And so, have you ever heard of an empathy disorder? Of course, I hadn't, but have you ever heard of that?
No, I've heard of lots of disorders, but not that one.
An empathy disorder. So I'm going to read it to you because it kind of falls into, are people who think that they're an empath, are they really suffering from one of these empathy disorders? Again, I'm not a doctor. I cannot diagnose. I just want to put that out there. I'm just curious. So I applied this to me, and I think I might have an empathy disorder. Let me tell you what they are. So there's two different types.
Wait, before you go into it, can I ask, where did you find this?
Sure.
Like, I'm surprised my algorithm didn't bring this up for me. Like, my Google should have brought this for me.
This is something from the UK. So it comes from uktherapyguide.com.
Okay.
And it talks about, and again, I came across this as I was trying to figure out the difference between the two. And this whole empathy disorder came up, and I'm like, huh. So I read into it a little bit, and I'm like, this seems interesting, and this sees like me. So there's two. Empathy disorder appears when your levels of empathy are either too high, so they call that hyper empathy syndrome, or too low, empathy deficit disorder. I'm going to let you guess which one I think I am.
Oh, hyper empathetic for sure. I mean, 100%.
Yeah. And I won't go through all of this, but I just want to give you a little teaser on what these are. So a hyper empathy syndrome occurs when you are too in tune with other people's emotions and mirror them to the same intensity. In other words, you care too much. People with hyper empathy may find it hard to regulate their emotions and may have a tendency to pick up on negative feelings. And to me, when I read that, and I've read the other things about what an empath, and again, this is all general conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put that out there. To me, that kind of felt like that's where an empath would lie, is somewhere in that hyper empathy. I think especially when it can really affect you, like this article saying. But of course, I can't just leave one side of the coin. So then I looked at what the empathy deficit disorder is. And it says, empathy deficit disorder is the polar opposite of hyper empathy syndrome. If hyper empathetic people care too much and are emotionally invested in someone else's pain, people with empathy deficit disorder can't understand this pain. Most of the time, effective empathy is the one that is lacking. So I feel like I suffer from this this empathy deficit disorder, because I relate more to that than I do the hyper. But it did get me thinking, do people who claim to be empaths, are they really maybe touching on that hyper empathy syndrome?
No, that's really fascinating, because I guess I didn't know. I'm curious if that's part of like the DSM in America, like the ICD codes for mental health. I have no idea. But of course, we could all be considered having some hyper or lack of disorder of some kind or another, right? But what an interesting way to look at that, I guess. I'd be super curious what the diagnosis criteria are for both of those, but
I have them if you want me to tell you.
But that might make for really boring listening, but I definitely email them to me for sure. But one of the things that I came across was this idea that, I don't know if they said that a lot of people who claim to be empaths, those might be my words, so let me be clear about that. But they kind of talked about how childhood trauma or codependency plays into that. And my family member that I was visiting with, that was definitely something that they and I talked about was, based on their experiences as a young person, that really could have built this hypervigilance in them. So when you have kids who are exposed to lots of trauma or have lots of instability, they become hypervigilant, where they're watching the environment and everything that happens in it. So they can feel the tone of a room, and they can sense the emotions of who is caring for them and things like that. And that was definitely a factor for my family member. And really several of the people that I've known in my life that have identified as empaths, it played true for a lot of them too. So I feel like there's some truth in that, just anecdotally from what I've seen in my own experiences with people. But I thought it was interesting too, the idea of like codependency. And, when I think of someone who's codependent, and I don't know if there's diagnosis criteria for that one either, but when I think of someone who's codependent, it's that like need to please. I'm going to make myself smaller so that there's room for you. We've kind of touched on that a little bit even in the last couple episodes where we've talked about this. And so this idea that I'm going to accommodate someone else, it's not a far reach for me to say, oh, okay, so I'm going to be super aware of this person's emotions because I can't be bigger than that person, right? So that was some of the research. Well, and I say I use research lightly. That was some of the reading that I had done. There was a doctor in the UK who flat out said, empathy is a real thing, empaths are not. He said there are people who are more empathetic than others. There are people who are effective at using empathy in building connection and relationship with other people. But this idea that there is some extra natural ability to be extra empathetic and feel emotions as if they were your own when they belong to someone else, he said that was a falsehood, and that wasn't something that he agreed with. Dr. Paul on the TikToks was his name.
Well, and I still go back to the whole, an empath can sense that without any kind of external triggers or any kind of cues. To me, that's very dangerous. I don't understand how one could just assume they know the feelings of another person without any kind of external cues to help you, because you could be misreading a situation and going down and in some cases, I'm sure, do more harm than you are trying to do good. One of the things I wanted to touch on, and I had not gone and done any kind of look to see, so I'm just going to ask you your opinion on this one. Do you think that people that are high in empathy, or maybe people that aren't high in empathy, can project their feelings onto other people, make them feel what you're feeling?
Well, I think the answer would have to be yes. I mean, just given the fact that if I walk into a room with my brow furrowed and, you know, growling or huffing or puffing and, an angry face, that's me projecting my feelings onto other people, right? Like, I am going to make sure you know how it is that I feel. Or if I walk into a room with a big smile on my face and I'm laughing, that's me projecting my feelings into the room, right? So I guess to me, the simple answer is yes. It would be silly of me to think that I think so. Sorry.
No, and I think even the examples you've given you're showing visual cues of how you're feeling so people can know how you're feeling.
Yes.
I'm taking that maybe one step further and saying you are actually projecting your feelings so people start feeling the feelings you want them to feel or that are bubbling up inside you. Here's an example. I have been in a room where I have been highly irritated and annoyed. And I have come into the room based off of, and I'm sure I was exuding all these external feelings, right? Probably my brow was furrowed, or I had this disgusted look on it, my body language, how I answered people's questions, whatever it is. I have come into a room that has been probably, I would say, tranquil or normal conversations. And just by my demeanor and how I look and how I act and my presence, I call it that, the presence that you walk into a room, suddenly the temperature in that room starts shifting and people start acting like how you're projecting. And so suddenly the conversation starts changing, or they start dying out, or people start feeling that uncomfortable. And maybe that's what I wanted them to feel in the moment. It sounds like I'm trying to be a real monster here, but no, in the context of what this meeting was, I wanted them to understand the problem and the impact, but I wanted them to know that it wasn't just, I wanted them to feel it. And so I remember walking into this particular meeting one time, and I called it sucking the air out of the room. And that's what I did. I walked in, and just because I was irritated, perturbed, angry, and I wanted people to know it, I almost let it radiate off of me until the point where these people were picking it up and they were actually starting to emulate it themselves. What would you call that? Is that not an empath, or is that something different?
I am so glad you said that, because it reminded me as I was doing my research. That sounds so official, and I don't feel qualified to do research. But as I was doing some reading and learning about this topic a little bit more, one of the things that came up a couple of different times was something called mirror neurons. Have you heard of that? Did you see any of that in your reading?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So, and I didn't catch enough about it to feel like I'm educated enough to say a whole lot about it. But one of the articles had talked about how we as people are born with mirror neurons or neurons. And what this does for us is it helps us reflect what we're experiencing, or something to that degree. And so that's exactly what that sounds like to me, or what that makes me think of, is that, and you see this a ton with babies. Like, babies will, you approach a baby with bright, happy eyes and a smile on your face. And what does baby do? Baby responds with, "Oh, okay, we're happy," right? Baby hears you get upset and baby starts crying. "Oh, okay, we're not happy. We're going to be upset," right? And I think that's a great example of how naturally we come with those mirror neurons. And I don't think they go away. But one of the articles had talked about how empaths are people with more mirror neurons, right? That they have more ability to read those feelings and then reflect them in their own feelings back. So that's the reading answer I would give to you. I think that as humans, that's naturally what we do. I walk into a tense environment and I could walk in boisterous and happy, and I walk into a tense environment and I'm going to lower my level of energy to match the room, right? And I think that's something that I've learned in working with people, is to try and match, where they're at to make people feel more comfortable in that helping relationship. But I think most people will respond that way, don't you?
Well, and that's what I'm asking. I mean, when you're the person that's walking in there and you're adopting the level of, the temperature of the room, and you're adjusting yourself to match what's in the environment, to me, that feels normal. What if you're the one that's coming in and you're setting the environment, right? You're the one that's coming in and you're changing it. Does that take somebody who's strong in empathy to do, or is that outside of even the empathy discussion? Because where I was going to attribute this to is kind of what you're talking about, I think, with this mirroring, which I've heard the term before in communication, parroting or mirroring people in communications. It's a normal thing that individuals do when you're talking to someone. If you haven't noticed, your gestures start matching what they're doing, or your tone reflection goes up with them, or you try to match the way you're hearing them talk to you. You try to match that. And that's normal, and that's mirroring conversations with individuals. And that's kind of what you're talking about. That's where I was going to go with it. But at the same time, when we're talking about empaths and the ability, again, being empathetic is one thing. Being an empath where you feel the same feelings they are, even if you don't have that experience, is something entirely different. Mm-hmm. My question was, does the ability to come into a room and change that environment and put that irritation out there and other people start picking up on it, is that a sign of being an empath, or is that a sign of what we all know and experience around this mirroring in conversations and almost parroting the other person? Mm-hmm. What I see is what I'm going to give back. So I guess the question is, which side of the aisle does that fall on?
Well, I think that, I don't know. I feel like the couple of mentions of the mirror neurons, everyone has them. It's a matter of how many you have, right? So I don't know. I think that is, I can walk into a room and be like, I'm going to make them all miserable by being angry and angsty, right? That doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but it probably will. I think that's just normal. I could also go into that same room and, just be quiet or somber, and that can affect the room too. I don't know that it's a matter of intention. I think that I can intentionally decide that I'm not going to affect the room and I'm going to match what's in there, right? I think that's just social norms to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to say for myself, I'm going to make a stance here. And again, I think it's because people could probably link it to my weak empathy muscle, but I find it hard to believe that there are people in this world. When I say sensitive, I'm saying being able to, without any experience, feel exactly the same feeling somebody else is. I find that very hard to believe. I don't know. And again, I'm going to relate it back to something I experienced. I mentioned before that grief was something, as I was a kid, I never really experienced a lot of. I didn't experience death or losing a loved one growing up at all, really. My family wasn't super close. And so, and my grandma that I am close to, she lived for a very long time. So growing up, I never had that. It would be impossible for me to go to a friend who had just lost a parent or even a spouse and be like, I know exactly how you're feeling, because I had never experienced anything close to that. After losing my mom, that has changed. But that doesn't make me an empath. That makes me more empathetic because I've experienced something that I can relate to someone. Mm-hmm. I pray to God every day I do not experience this, and I feel so sorry for everybody who has, but I'm going to use this as the next example. For those of us out there that have lost a child, I have not ever experienced that, and I pray every day that I never do. I think it would be incredibly insensitive of me to even assume that if I saw someone who just lost their child, that I would be able to know exactly how they felt. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's my lack of empathy. Maybe it's the fact that I don't have a strong empathetic muscle. But that's what I go back to. Like, to me, it would be so incredibly insensitive to just assume, because I think I'm good at picking up on people's feelings, to know exactly how somebody who's going through that situation would know. And I think that's the danger of being an empath to me. For people that claim to be empaths, I don't think that they're bad people. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I find it incredibly dangerous to just assume that they are sensitive enough that they can just pick up, even with no personal experiences, being able to understand fully what that person is going through. I just don't buy it, and I don't think it exists.
Well, and I think that, I think for me, like I said, I've known several people who claim to be empaths, who identify as empaths, right? And I do think that they are very empathetic in nature. I think that they can understand where I'm coming from. And I think that when I think about things like childhood trauma or even past adult trauma, when you experience something big, I think it does make us more able to empathize and identify with someone who is suffering in a big way, right? But I also think that some of that is about how I set boundaries for myself. You know what I mean? Like I can understand, well, for instance, I've never physically lost a child, right? Now in my time in foster care, I had children that I loved deeply that I thought were going to be part of my family forever, that there was the option to adopt and it didn't happen. So there was some loss there. And I feel like that gives me a little bit of insight, very, very tiny insight, but definitely not in the way that a parent who has lost a child forever and what that must feel like for them. And I think it's important for me, and this is just part of my work training. This is part of what we do in peer support, is to be able to understand, I can identify with your experiences. I can understand the challenges and the difficulties and all of the things that you may be going through, but I can never know exactly what that walk is, because we all have a unique perspective that we're gaining things from. And so that was, as my family member and I were talking about this even last night, that was kind of the encouragement that I gave them was, you can feel a room, but always remember that there's space for feelings you may not understand, and to be able to guard yourself from feeling too much, from jumping in too much to that feeling or identifying with that feeling is really important, so that you can make sure that you're healthy and happy. You know what I'm saying?
I do. One thing that you said early on, though, in your statement, and I want to go back to it because I got to be honest, one of the first things that when I was doing I'm going to call it research, because anything that I learn that's not new or that's not known to me is research. So
fair.
During my research, one of the things that popped up was boundaries. And it was a very hard line, Jamie. It said something like one of the main differences between being in showing empathy and being an empath is healthy boundaries. And I've heard you say that a couple times as we've been talking over, the course of this podcast, and boundaries are important. And we've talked about that. What I thought was really telling was this article almost defined what being, showing empathy, which is healthy boundaries, being an empath, which is you don't have healthy boundaries. And that was kind of interesting to me. So I'm curious, again, in your opinion, because I look to your opinion in this because you have a lot more, I think,
marginally
experience around this or knowledge. Yeah. Tribal knowledge. I don't know what you want to call it. What do you think about that comment? Do you think that there's some validity to that, people that can show healthy empathy reflect and use those healthy boundaries, and maybe individuals that claim to be empaths, they really don't have those healthy boundaries, and so they're crossing lines they were never meant to cross? What do you think?
If I think about the healthy boundaries thing, right, which I think is an important topic for so many reasons in so many ways. For instance, in my work, it's important for me to help support people to build skills in order to make the changes that last in their lives that they want to make, right? So just that sentence alone, I have to set a boundary for myself. I have to decide I am not going to go and make every phone call. I'm not going to go gather a bunch of donations and drop them on your doorstep. Let's do this together so you can learn how to do this for yourself, right? And that's a boundary that I have to set, because I feel like there's a lot of times that I have someone that I might be working with that it would take me 30 seconds to fix the problem. But if I do that, then they're not getting what they need. So if I apply that same idea to this, right? I do consider myself a pretty empathetic person. I do think that there are times where I'm watching something on television that makes me cry because I feel like I could feel those emotions also, right? Like I can identify with where they're at. And I can imagine that if that happened to me, it would be very painful. I think that's part of crying in a movie, right? That we start owning some of the emotion that we're seeing play out. I think the boundary for me would be, I can see you're crying. You must be devastated and heartbroken. And I know that it's because your plant friend died, right? Like, I mean, to be able to start projecting like, this is why you're sad and you're devastated and heartbroken and those kind of things. I think that is a line that has to be carefully watched and a boundary that we have to set for ourselves if we want to practice and exercise our empathy.
Well, one thing that you just said again, too, you used the word ownership. And to me, a healthy boundary would be if somebody's, if somebody's sensitive and they can pick up on other people's emotions, I think it'd be really easy to own those emotions as your own. And now I'm speculating here, but I'm trying to connect the dots the best that I can. The word ownership, like what happens when those feelings that you're feeling for someone else you own them, so now they become your feelings. What happens when suddenly the focus isn't on the person who's having this crisis or this event happen, but now the empath who's coming along, they're making it about themselves because they're owning those emotions, and now they are seeking out some of that. I don't want to call it attention, but you see do you understand where I'm trying to go to? Like, at what point, because a healthy boundary to me would be to make sure that when you're sympathizing or giving empathy to someone, that you're not making it about yourself. And I can see as an empath how that could be really easy to do, where suddenly people are trying to console you because you're feeling the same feelings as somebody else, when in actuality, you've not experienced what the person has. I know I'm kind of getting lost in my analogy here, but do you get my point?
I do. And I do think that is part of that has to be taking personal ownership and responsibility for my own feelings and what my role is, right? Because I think some of that then becomes, I think back to all of the years that I've done this kind of work, and I think about the times that I've made mistakes in that. I have made mistakes where I walk in thinking, I know exactly how you feel. I know exactly what this must be like. And that can really harm relationship in a helping role, and I definitely think that bleeds over into our personal life. Who wants to be with someone who is so in my feelings that I can't be in my feelings or something like that? You know what I'm saying? Like, let me feel my feelings and express it to you, because that's how you're really going to understand how I feel. And that's how we build connection, is by being able to share how we feel about things and to be able to share experiences and what that impact was for us and things like that. So I think that's a really great way to look at that boundary for sure. One of the articles that I had read, and there was an article that kind of talked about, I guess I should probably mention this too. There was an article that talked about like some research that has been done into this idea of empaths and how that happens and things like that. And that's where some of these ideas about like childhood trauma and codependency and things like that came from. So it's not like there's not some hard and fast evidence or research that's been done. But the article did state clearly that it's pretty inconclusive and that really can't draw a line right now. But one of the things that I thought was super fascinating, and I hope this isn't where you were going and I'm about to steal your thunder here, but that article, one of the articles that I read came from Psych Central, and it talked about what is a dark empath. And guess what popped up again? I know. Guess what popped up again? It was the dark triad. And they kind of combined the two and said, when we've got someone like a dark empath, it's a personality type that combines the skill of cognitive empathy with dark triad traits, including narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So I thought that was really fascinating too, that thing that we talked about way back when we were talking about like the dark side of emotional intelligence plays in here again. And I guess to me, in conclusion, one of the conclusions that I came to is that I think that empathy probably is a really big, outcome of practicing good emotional intelligence. As we grow our emotional intelligence, I think that our empathy does grow. So I think that that's part of, I thought that line was drawn a little bit harder for me today as I was finishing up reading some of these things. So,
well, and one of the things that I'm going to, and I haven't even read it, but I can't wait to get into the dark triad discussion, is there, with just hearing the word dark empath makes me feel like that's a whole level of manipulation on the emotional spectrum, because if you can, and I'm speculating, I haven't read it, but I'm just trying to understand what that could be, just even from what you said, that could be a form of manipulating or even damaging other people just using their emotions against themselves. And again, I don't know what it is. I don't want to go down that path any longer until we can actually get in there and do that research, because I am super excited to talk about the dark triad. Where I was going to inject a little bit of humor in here is all of our conversations that we've had so far. Do you know what it reminds me of? And I love sci-fi, so I'm going to give you a hint. It's sci-fi. But do you know what it reminds me of?
Oh, goodness. Well, another example of an empath in science fiction was Deanna Troi on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Is that it?
Exactly. This is exactly what it was telling me, was here you have a character who, and how many times have you watched one of those episodes where she's like, I feel this, or I'm sensing this. And the whole episode maybe starts off with how she was feeling. And I thought, what if she was just having a bad day? And I know her character she was more of a psychic, and she was able to do that. And that was her character. But that's what all of this reminds me of, is I'm afraid of the Deanna Troys that are in real life, who think they have that gift and that ability, and they are 100% sure in it. And how do they use that either against or to people, or how do they come into these situations already knowing what they know because they sense emotions? And what are the outcomes? And that's what scares me out of all of this, is the real life Deanna Troys that are out there that are practicing this and saying, I'm an empath and here's what this means. And I know exactly how you're feeling because I can feel it too, even though I have no real experience that would even lend me to understand how that is. But I just do because I'm an empath. That's what all this boils down to me, is I'm nervous for those Deanna Troys out in the world.
There was also one of the vampires in Twilight could also do the same thing. It was Jasper. I don't know. Did you watch the Twilight movies? Am I speaking to myself here?
Yeah, you're speaking to yourself. I've heard of them. I've never watched them.
So, okay. The first one really stinks, but the rest of them are really good.
Well, I just want to say, I watched the first one, and I'm sorry, I'm a classic vampire person then, because when they went outside in the sunlight, which vampires cannot do, small segue here, they glittered or sparkled or shimmered or whatever it is that they did. Vampires can't do that. When the sunlight hits them, they burn. And they were out there looking all glittery. And I'm like, this is not a vampire show. So I stopped watching after that.
They were bedazzled. But no, and part of the show is they all have like extra abilities, right? Like Edward can hear everybody but Bella's thoughts. But Jasper was one that he could sense emotion and then project emotion. So if someone was feeling a certain way and he wanted them to feel a different way, he could project that to them. Well, and some of their abilities came from when they were alive as humans. So I wonder, Jasper might have been an empath as a human. So just food for thought. It's in pop culture. So of course we have empaths, right?
It was on television or it's in the social medias. It must be true. It must be.
It's the TikToks are my friend. Anyway, well, this has been a really good conversation. And for one, I think this topic has been something that's been good for me to think about, just because it does help me. It helps me understand not only like the value in empathy, but the power in empathy too. And so, just reminds me that I do need to be mindful when I practice empathy and not projecting my own thoughts and feelings on other people. I think if you identify as an empath, just like every other skill we have, there's always room for growth. And that is, I have had to grow my empathy, and that is a space where we can all work. So thanks for bringing the research again, my friend. It's been fun chatting about it.
This conversation is always good for me because it's uncomfortable because it's a space that I'm not very well adversed in. And it's something that comes foreign to me. We want to talk about logic and reason. I'm all there all day long, but you start talking about how people can, first of all, navigate their own emotions. And then you layer on top of that people that can just sense other people's emotions. That's where you lose me. And I was going to make a joke or something to say, hey, voodoo is alive and well in the form of empaths. But honestly, I can't sit here and say it's 100% a hoax. But where I'm sitting from my chair, I can't understand it. And these types of conversations help me and challenge me and push on me to make me want to learn more and understand more. Because again, I'm not the authority on this. My opinion might be that empaths aren't real. Doesn't make it so. So these conversations are good.
Well, and for sure, if you know someone who identifies as an empath, the kind that feels physically, emotions and feelings and things like that, send them our way. We'd sure love to have a conversation and learn more about their perspective in this too. Because yes, Malin and I are not the end all be all, as much as, we'd like to think so sometimes. But anyway, it's been a great conversation. We appreciate all of you for joining us around the round table today for this conversation. And we hope you'll join us again next week as we tear apart another topic and learn all we can from it. So we'll see you again next week around the round table.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Malin. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999. Or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.